You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
Hi there, welcome to News Talks, the Times Higher Education podcast in which we delve behind the headlines to discuss the biggest stories in global higher ed. I'm Miranda Prynne, editor of Campus, and I'm joined today by our Times Higher Education Asia Pacific editor, John Ross, to discuss the rapid development of universities in the Shenzhen and Greater Bay Area of China, and to ask, could this region ultimately become the world's next leading hub for higher education? John, it's a rare treat to speak to you given our geographical and time zone differences, so how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well.
I am indeed. You've just returned from a trip to Shenzhen, now one of the largest cities in China, which has grown from a modest border town of 58,000 back in 1980 when it was designated as China's first special economic zone, into a global tech hub boasting more than 18 million people and still growing rapidly. Now, Shenzhen sits opposite Hong Kong on the Pearl River Delta, and it's one of 11 cities, if you include Hong Kong and Macau, which make up the Greater Bay Area, a region that has witnessed the most rapid urban expansion in human history in the last 40 years. So, John, I think it's hard for many of us in the West to envisage the scale of what is going on in Shenzhen and the Greater Bay Area. What were your first impressions?
Look, it's a bit hard for me to believe it too, coming from a backwater like Australia. We're dealing with a part of the world that just operates in a different dimension to a place like Australia. Easily more than three, probably approaching four times the population of Australia in a region. I haven't done the comparisons, but I'd imagine it would probably fit into one of our bigger sheep farms in the Northern Territory. It's massive. As you say, 11 cities, many of which most people in the West will never have heard of, even though quite a few of them probably would have populations bigger than London's. It operates at a completely different scale than what I'm used to. And I've been to Hong Kong quite a few times. And I guess the first time I went to Shenzhen was just before the COVID pandemic. But I sort of, in my naivety, I imagined this kind of dour under the thumb place, on the other side of the soft border from this wonderful chaotic place called Hong Kong, a poor cousin in a sense. When I finally got there, I found it was anything but. The reality is Shenzhen's this high-rise, gleaming, vibrant, huge wonderland. There's a great restaurant scene there. It's quite beautiful in places, lovely subtropical gardens, great walks around the edges of Shenzhen Bay, which is this very wide bay jutting east from the Pearl River Delta, which is even bigger. These are big water bodies. Quite prosperous. It's the sort of places that models go to do shoots, and it's a tech hub in its own right. In different sort of hubs of the city, it houses headquarters of tech giants, including Alibaba, Huawei, Tencent, BYD. According to Wikipedia, Shenzhen has surpassed both Guangzhou and Hong Kong in GDP, has the second most skyscrapers, the fifth most billionaires, and the seventh most Fortune Global 500 headquarters of any city in the world, if you can believe Wikipedia. And from my eyes, it kind of fits that description.
Yeah, that's fairly incredible. It's interesting you say that it's beautiful, because the one thing that I may not expect of a city built at such a rapid rate, this transformation of a rural farming area, which was what the Pearl River Delta was 40 years ago, into this enormous metropolis. I'm imagining a kind of urban jungle, but that's interesting you say that it's got a huge amount of green built in there, which credit, I guess, to those urban designers. Alongside that, there's been a major drive to build up a regional higher education system that can keep up with the expansion of population and industry. How successful have these efforts so far been?
Not as successful as the efforts in economic growth, manufacturing, technology have been, and I imagine that kind of sticks in the grooves of the people who are governing these cities. probably doesn't fit with their self-image, particularly given the extraordinary growth in other aspects of what these cities do, and in particular Shenzhen, just across the border, a stone's throw from a place like Hong Kong, which is so globally connected and has been so successful in developing a world-renowned higher education system. So it probably doesn't sit quite right. There have been some successes, probably particularly SUZTech, that's the Southern University of Science and Technology, which set up, I think, about 15 years ago in Shenzhen, and it's doing really well, rising really fast, but hasn't cracked the top 100 yet in any of the major university rankings. The only university that's done that is Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, and only in the Shanghai ranking. So that's quite different from some of China's other regions, particularly Shanghai and Beijing, both of which have clusters of extremely well-regarded universities. So, as I say, it probably doesn't sit well with the city's fathers.
No, given the determination that seems to be apparent in what gets delivered in China, possibly not. But it sounds like a lot of universities have been established, so it's more a question of the level of prestige of these institutions that's the issue than the number of them.
I think that's right. I think there's something in the order of 50 or so universities in the Greater Bay Area, which would be in keeping with such a huge population. But yeah, they don't have the cachet of a Tsinghua or a Peking University, for example.
Now, you mentioned SUSTech, SOSTech, and actually it's interesting that they've come up because I think the last time that THE was able to visit Shenzhen was in 2017 when we visited that particular institution. And believe it or not, the population of the city at that time was 6 million fewer people than it is now, just to give people an idea of the rate of growth. But the fact that our last visit was nearly 10 years ago is indicative of the fact a lot of Western commentary about what is going on in mainland China is, of course, based on observations from afar because it can be tricky getting direct access. So this recent visit of yours is a fairly big deal. Of course, the region does have an innate advantage in Hong Kong being on its doorstep, which is the only city in the world to boast 5 universities ranked in the world top 100. And something that we have reported on from afar is that this higher education expertise is being leveraged in the form of new branch campuses being set up in the mainland cities around the Greater Bay Area, such as Shenzhen and Guangzhou. And of course, it's one of these that you recently visited, John. So you've seen a lot of universities in your time. How did the Chinese University of Hong Kong in Shenzhen compare?
Look, it would be a really nice place to study. The first thing that struck me about it was its size. In my mind's eye, I was imagining something like some of the branch campuses I've seen of Australian universities in Kuala Lumpur, which are sort of contained affairs. CUHK Shenzhen is as big as any university in Australia. It's a university in its own right, and it's quite large. There's a lot of space, which is a surprising thing about China. Even though it's got such a huge population, they like their space. The roads are wide, things have generous proportions, and CUHK Shenzhen certainly fits into that category. So it's kind of cupped around a forested hill. It's quite a steep campus, although not as steep as its mother campus in Hong Kong. CUHK is notoriously steep. Hong Kong is a very steep sort of region. It's not quite that hilly, but it's pretty hilly, and it's cupped around this forested hill park that I understand is run by the city government and is very popular with local walkers. It's very green, and you've got this big campus arranged around it. But the first thing I noticed as I was driving there is there's a series of 4 very tall residential buildings on high ground in the campus, each topped by a single letter. So, give me a C, give me a U, give me an H, give me a K. It's sort of architectural cheerleading to the area around it. And, you can see these things from miles away, I think. So it's a real proclamation of the identity of the campus. The whole place, it's very nicely appointed. There's some student residential colleges with really nice recreational facilities, food halls, lots of sporting fields. There's lots of water features right over the campus, ponds, things. Water's a big deal. It's part of the feng shui tradition, which I think Chinese people take very, very seriously. And there's a big lake called Fairy Lake, which unfortunately can't be used for water sports because I understand it's essentially a reservoir water storage facility. But it gives it a real sense of calm. And there's a beautiful pavilion on one side of the lake that I think is about 300 years old and comes from, I think, Nanjing or that area, some distance to the north. It was donated by a philanthropist. There's this quite large bell tower, and I understand that was essentially built to block out the view of a Stalinist building nearby, which is actually the main building of a branch campus of Moscow State University. It's been set up with a Beijing university. There's a very big music college. I was told it has 200 grand pianos, so the piano tuner basically has a job for life. Clusters of very attractive research and administrative building. And one of the things you really notice at the moment is a massive construction site on one side of the lake. That's going to be the medical school when it opens in about 3 years, I believe. I counted about 8 enormous cranes. So they don't do things by half. It's a big place.
It sounds amazing. Again, I'm struck by your description of areas of it feeling very calm, because it's hard to imagine finding calm in a city of 18 million people, given that it can be tricky enough in London. Can you give us a bit of background about the university? When was it established and how does it compare to its home institution?
Look, it's a very broad offering. As I said, it's basically a university in its own right. It has 8 schools, so there's management and economics, science and engineering, humanities and social sciences, data science, music. It has a medical school, although at the moment it doesn't have a dedicated space for that, so it's about scattered around the campus. A school of public policy and a school of artificial intelligence. And it was established only in 2014. At the time, apparently, the site had a few disused factory buildings and apparently quite a few mice and some venomous snakes, I've heard. May still have some venomous snakes, but if so, they're hiding away in these really, really nicely maintained gardens that, as I say, lend a sense of calm to this place. It's got about 13,000 students now. I think it started with about 150, so orders of magnitude of growth. I'm told that when the medical school opens, that's expected to grow to about 25,000, which will be slightly more than the mother university in Hong Kong. The students are mainly mainland Chinese, very clever ones. I think they only accept the top 1% or so from the CUHK exam. So, obviously, access to a huge number of very bright people in mainland China. I think it's 85% mainland Chinese and about 15% international. That would be mainly from Asian neighbours, particularly Vietnam, Indonesia and Central Asia, the Stans. There's also quite a few exchange students, particularly from Europe and Greece in particular, I understand. Not many people coming from the United States at the moment, but the Europeans are quite keen. And it was originally conceived very much in the same terms as Chinese University of Hong Kong, which is Hong Kong's second oldest university, and was sort of envisaged as a kind of a bridge between the East and the West, a place where you could understand both. And like CUHK in Hong Kong, it's also built around a college system. So undergraduates, I think, are expected, and most do, live in residential colleges, which also have educative functions and pastoral care functions. It's more than just a place to live. It's also got 3 very well-appointed research labs that are affiliated with Nobel laureates, I think 2 Americans and 1 from Israel, from memory. So they're doing some very high-level research there as well.
Yeah, interesting to hear that there is a growing contingent of international students, because that's something that I'm guessing we may well see more of as these institutions grow. One thing that does strike me is just what a huge project this has been, one that would require huge amounts of investment. And do we know where that money's coming from? Is it largely from City University of Hong Kong, or is there a lot of support coming from authorities in mainland China?
Yeah, so the Hong Kong partner is the Chinese University of Hong Kong. It's getting a lot of support from the Shenzhen city government, which contributed the land, and is also making another campus available nearby for various reasons. It's become available to CUHK-SZ as well. I understand it contributes quite a lot of money towards the running of the place as well. There's philanthropic support. I mean, it's essentially a private university, and it gets quite a lot of support also through tuition fees, which are about 20,000 US a year, I understand. That's a lot by local standards. It's much more than students would pay at public universities in China, but less than, it's probably less, I'd imagine, than what is charged in comparable universities in Australia, and certainly less than they would be charged in the parent university in Hong Kong. Yeah, it's doing pretty well financially.
What other prestigious Hong Kong universities have now established outposts in the Greater Bay Area?
So Hong Kong Baptist University was the first, and that was way back in 2005. It launched a joint campus with Beijing Normal University in Zhuhai, which is just across the soft border from Macau. But more recently, the really high-ranked universities that have set up there have been CUHK in 2014, and more recently, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, which opened a campus in late 22, and City University of Hong Kong is in the process of opening in Dongguan, which is just in the north of Shenzhen. It received permission in 2024. All of these ventures have local partners. For CUHK, the local partner is Shenzhen University. For Hong Kong Baptist University, as I said, it was Beijing Normal University, obviously in Beijing. HKUST's partner is Guangzhou University. Its campus is sort of on the port area of Guangzhou. And City University of Hong Kong's partner is the Dongguan University of Technology. These partner universities, they're involved to greater and lesser degrees. My understanding is some of them are effectively almost silent partners that just have a small involvement in the runnings of the institutions, and some are much more involved.
Yeah, and I guess given the regulatory differences between Hong Kong and mainland China, it's possibly very helpful to have a local partner on the ground, whatever level they're working at. Which brings me on to the question of what's in it for these Hong Kong institutions, because their prestige is presumably in part due to the fact they've enjoyed greater academic freedom than universities in mainland China, and they have a very international outlook. So why are they so keen to set up these so-called cross-border initiatives or cross-border collaborations?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but probably the primary one is space. Hong Kong, there's not that much space. And also, as I said, there's a lot of hills, so the usable land is pretty limited. I mean, Chinese University of Hong Kong, for example, which I think is probably the biggest of the Hong Kong universities in terms of space, but it really has nowhere else to go on that campus. So, yeah, as I say, despite the massive population over the soft border, that there seems to be a lot of space. And it means that the Hong Kong universities can set up labs, which are often identical to what they have in Hong Kong, but it provides a spillover function. If the students in Hong Kong just can't get access to the lab, they can go over and work in a more or less identical facility in the campus that are affiliated with across the border. Also, as I've mentioned, in mainland China, you have access to a huge pipeline of very, very talented students, along with new opportunities for investment from the government and from business. You have access to Chinese research funds that aren't available to you in Hong Kong because these funds can't be transferred across the border. But a professor in a Hong Kong university who has an affiliation in the branch campus across the border can use that affiliation to attract research funds. And China has a lot of research funds, amounts that Western university systems would be very envious of. It's great publicity. You know, one of the people at CUHK-Shenzhen told me that he used to work at CUHK in Hong Kong, and for every mention that he got in the Hong Kong press, he was getting 10 mentions in the mainland Chinese press. So a lot of visibility. Also exchange opportunities both ways. So students based in China can come and do stints in Hong Kong and vice versa. The reality is that on both sides, they probably prefer to go somewhere else, Japan or Europe or Australia, or because geographically and even to a degree culturally, these two regions are very similar. But still, for Hong Kong universities, for students in Hong Kong universities, there's a lot of value in getting some genuine experience of the Greater Bay, or the Chinese side of the Greater Bay Area. I mean, as I understand it, people pop across the border quite regularly to shop or to go to the restaurant. They might just go for a night, but it's very different to go and work there, particularly if you're doing a research project for 6 months. You really get a sense of the place. And as it's still growing, as you've said, so there's real advantage in really tapping into that enormously growing technological and economic ecosystem. And it's an opportunity to contribute. Given their lack of space, lack of capacity to take a great deal more students, if Hong Kongs really want to contribute to their region, they really have no choice but going across the border and being there. That's the way it was conveyed to me anyway.
Yeah, and of course, it's worth remembering that this may be crossing a soft border, but the distance between, for instance, City University Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and its mother institution is what, a 90-minute drive, an hour's drive? It's not far.
Yeah, it depends on the traffic conditions, but
Yeah.
it can be as little as an hour.
Yeah.
Most of this area, there's a little bit of a kind of rural residential buffer on the Hong Kong side of the border, or a bit of greenness. And you will go through green areas, but this is mostly built up all the way across. If you didn't have to cross the border, you wouldn't know that you're going to a different territory. They're very similar places in many ways.
Yes, and there's umpteen reasons from what you describe as to why Hong Kong University would want to establish it. But the other thing that's worth mentioning is I believe Guangdong, the province, mainland China province in this Greater Bay Area, has the highest provincial GDP in China. So this is an area of great research commercialization, industry partnership opportunity. And you've already referenced the very large number of massive tech names that are based there, and indeed I'm sure more will arrive. So that's it for the Hong Kong institutions. The Chinese authorities, what is their thinking in welcoming universities from a semi-autonomous region like Hong Kong, which therefore function in fairly different regulatory environments to what would be expected in the Greater Bay Area? What's their thinking in welcoming them there?
Well, look, I think primarily the opportunity to learn and to a degree copy. One of the Hong Kong executives told me that within the space of a decade, they've replicated something that took us over 50 years to create. So it's a pretty good learning opportunity. The opportunity to experiment, the way these joint venture campuses are governed and managed and regulated is somewhat different to how things are done in the public universities in China. And there's a degree of latitude in the way they can behave, and so they can try different things. So, and I think the Chinese authorities recognise the value of that. And as I said, they get a lot of support from the city governments right through the GBA to really develop these opportunities. The authorities are interested in making these things work. The branch campuses, they have to get approved by the Ministry of Education in Beijing. And I think that can take a few years. And as I said, they have to have a local partner. But the governance arrangements are very different. I mean, essentially, presidents in Chinese universities are answerable to representatives of the Communist Party of China. That arrangement is much more dissipated for these branch campuses. They're governed by boards, quite similar to the governance arrangements in the Hong Kong universities. The Vice-Chancellor of the Hong Kong partner sits at the head of the governing board of the campus on the Chinese side, typically. And they operate sort of at arm's length from the Ministry of Education. So the way it was explained to me is public universities in China almost operate on the basis of endless MOUs with the Ministry of Education. And they're subject to quite stringent rules, particularly around postgraduate education. I think they're told when they can start accepting postgraduate students, how many they can accept. There's quite stringent templates in terms of the degrees that can be offered and what they're called. These things can be changed, but you have to seek approval. It's a very time-consuming process. The branch campuses, as I understand it, really don't have to worry about these sorts of things. So they have much more latitude to operate, to try things out. The college system that I mentioned at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Shenzhen, that's pretty unique for that area. Not many universities operate like that. So they'll tend to have students in one particular discipline and also students of particular ethnicities. The Chinese students dorm with other Chinese students, the engineering students dorm with other engineering students. That doesn't happen in CUHK Shenzhen. It's this glorious sort of mixture of different disciplines and ethnicities, which is a great opportunity to learn through your living arrangements and the people that you're hanging out with. Yeah, and even things like Christmas, Thanksgiving. As I understand, the branch campus can celebrate these sorts of things. That's not encouraged in the Chinese public universities, which means they don't do it. So, yeah, it's quite a different environment.
Yes, it sounds like the Chinese authorities are taking a fairly pragmatic approach to how they handle these branch campuses, with a nod to the fact they are coming from a very different environment. Have there been, do we know of, any challenges encountered by these initiatives? Have the cultural, political, regulatory differences between Hong Kong and mainland China caused any problems? Issues around academic freedom, for instance, or does it all appear to be running fairly smoothly?
Look, it's hard to believe there haven't been all sorts of teething problems with ventures of this scale and complexity, but it seems like they're dealt with quietly and they don't seem to be deal breakers. The biggest threat and biggest challenge for most foreign branch campuses of the university is financial. These things often just fall in a heap for various reasons. The way it was conveyed to me, that's not really much of an issue for these branch campuses, partly because they can't transfer money back home anyway. So they were never set up for financial purposes. And my view is that most foreign branch campuses don't work very well. If you're setting them up for financial purposes, then you're in the wrong game anyway. But with the rules around money transfer for these particular institutions, there's just no opportunity to make money, so there's no expectation of doing it. And that I think introduces a degree of stability. The regulatory differences, as I've said, you used the word pragmatic. I think there's a compromise there. Cultural and political differences, it's one country, two systems, or as one person said to me, it's one country before it's two systems. So the political differences aren't huge. The cultural differences arguably aren't that huge either. You've got a lot of linguistic similarities, although interestingly, in Shenzhen, the main language is Mandarin, not Cantonese, which is probably the major language spoken at home within the region. But Shenzhen being this incredibly fast-growing place is essentially a city of immigrants, internal immigrants. So Mandarin being much more widely spoken across China than Cantonese. So there is that difference. But it's not like we have Australian universities starting to set up in the UAE and Saudi Arabia now. You can imagine huge cultural differences there, or we already have branch campuses in Indonesia, Malaysia, India. There's nothing like that sort of difference. These are institutions that, as you say, you can drive between in an hour with very, very similar cultures and essentially the same political system. So that really doesn't seem to be much of an issue. Academic freedom, it's probably hard to get straight answers on some of these things, but most of the people I spoke to didn't really see it as a huge issue. They tended to think we in the West have a Western conceptualization of academic freedom, which doesn't necessarily apply in these places. Even before Hong Kong fell under Chinese rule, there would have been differences. I mean, you look right across the region, there's different conceptualizations of academic freedom in places like Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, certainly. So there's a range of different views about this sort of thing. Like many things with China, you will get very, very different views. So some people think, nah, it's fine. Other people think it's terrible. And that occurs in Hong Kong as well. There are some people who are very, very unhappy with the way things have gone, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years. But a lot of those people have left Hong Kong. Some people who are still there think academic freedom has really been trodden on. Others say, no, it's pretty strong. So you get a range of views around that. But I think the essential difference is an Australian or a UK or a US university might face a real reputational risk of setting up in a place like China and either dealing with real slights on academic freedom or at least perceptions that it was tolerating that. Those sorts of differences don't exist with Hong Kong universities because they're already subject to the same rules. So it's a very different kettle of fish.
That makes sense. And of course, it's easy to commentate from afar and focus on the potential differences. But as you rightly point out, there's far more in common between these two areas, which are in fact right next door to each other, than there is which separates them. You know, you talk about different conceptualizations of academic freedom. Of course, that has to be acknowledged. Equally, there's different conceptualizations of academic freedom, frankly, within the UK right now. So everyone's got a slightly different stance on that.
I think that's very true. And the same in Australia. We have this squeaky clean conceptualization of our uncompromising approach to academic freedom. I think there are many threats to that, and they don't necessarily come from authorities. It's a different challenge than what you would face in China, but it exists all the same.
Yeah, quite. Hence the fiery debates that continue to rage around it. Now, it's well known that China is working really hard to keep its own students within its own borders for study with growing success. But could the growth of these institutions in Shenzhen and neighbouring cities in this region see it draw in more international students, do you think? I mean, especially given that much of the international student market does already come from Asia. And I'm intrigued if we think we'll see more of a perhaps reverse flow from the West.
I think all of those things are inevitable. And, you know, it's happening now from Asia, but I think it also happens to a degree from the West. There's a lot of people who are very interested in China, and a campus like the one I've described would be a very good place to study it. Yeah, there are all sorts of reasons why students within China and students, the neighbours, Vietnam in particular, Indonesia, the Stans, Malaysia, many of the neighbours would be attracted to a place like this. It's closer to home. There's potentially less risk in many ways than going to a place like UK or Australia, where you have all these issues with visas now. You have the huge cost. You have worries about the cultural difference, maybe physical safety, health issues, another pandemic. It's so much more comfortable to study close to home. We're definitely seeing that with Chinese students either staying at home or going to places like Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, even Korea and Japan to an extent. The same thing will apply for the Asian neighbours of China. It's a much cheaper place to live. It's a vibrant place. It's got a lot going for it, rapidly becoming the business and scientific centre of the world. And there are these huge demographic pressures on China, quite similar to Japan and South Korea, to do something about their declining youth population. But I think the way the demographics work at the moment, there's still a real capacity and a real need probably for some of those students to study overseas, but that's rapidly becoming less and less the case as the youth population declines and as the population of good Chinese universities to accommodate these people grows. So there's a real demographic pressure there. And, this is something that Western university systems, particularly in your country and mine, I would say, really need to grapple with. We've financed our systems on this flow of students from the wealthy middle classes, particularly of China. I don't think that's guaranteed for very much longer. And it's something that, I have no doubt Western university administrators are already thinking about.
Yeah, and if they're not thinking about it, it's one they definitely need to start thinking about. In conclusion, do you think that the Chinese ambition to create an educational mega hub in this region, a world-leading, I should say, educational mega hub, is likely to succeed?
It's hard to see why not. The conditions are there. It's got the money, it's got the patience, it's got the pulling power. History is probably on its side. Yeah, it might take a while, but I think it will succeed.
They've got your vote of confidence there, John, as someone who's just returned from that region. I mean, there is no doubt that China and its higher education system is in the ascendancy, and it shows what can be achieved with really focused government support through both policy and funding. And given the incredible transformation of the Greater Bay Area over the last half century, it's not difficult to imagine that this region will become a major centre of international education in line with its tech and manufacturing prowess. Would you be keen to go back in a few years and see how these various projects and branch campuses have developed?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I've only visited one of them so far. I think China's a fascinating place. I'd go anytime I've got the chance, really. It's a different world.
Well, let's hope that someone important is listening to that. Great. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks, John, for sharing your observations of Shenzhen. It's fascinating stuff. And thank you to you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please do like, share and subscribe. And we will be back with you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.